What's up? Today I'm going to show you guys how to make a DJ mix in Ableton. Now, people will tell you all the time, they're like, I only mix live, blah, 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 blah. Now, granted, there's some people, they have their live sets and stuff like that. I've recorded live sets before and I've put them out. But a lot of people nowadays will make their mixes in Ableton and then go back into Serato or whatever other software they're using, and then they'll record any scratches or any other transitional effects that they want to kind of emulate with a mixer that they could in Ableton. They'll just go back to the mixer and do it that way. And that's also how I do it when I'm making a mix. And before we go any further, if you guys learn anything in this video, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us out over here, and I greatly appreciate it. Okay, let's show you how to make a mix. Okay, so let's just go to the chart section. We'll pick something here. We'll just do first class to start. Why not? Look for something else that's relatively similar in tempo, I guess. Okay, so what you want to do is once you have all the tracks, you're going to want to drop them in. So you just select all the ones that you want to use. And then once you drag it in, make sure you have enough audio tracks selected. So I'm just going to use Control T here on my PC, or you could use Command T to add audio tracks. And then once you have that, just drag, hold Control, because it's in the first audio track right now that I have. Once you hold Control, it adds them to separate audio tracks, and you just let go. Alright, so let's set this to the tempo we want this to be at. I don't even think we're going to use WoW. I'll just use these two tracks to give you guys different examples of how I do things. And then you want to put everything in Complex Pro. Unless you're doing any sort of like pitch variation, then you want to kind of use Complex in terms of warping. But I'm going to put things in Complex Pro right now. And you can also see here, a little bit of the first beat is off. So sometimes Ableton can be a little weird, or any other DAW for that matter. When you drop it in, it's important to really zoom in. Get very specific on where your first kind of like note is, or where the first kind of signal of audio is. You can either hit Control E or Command E, or you can just right click and you can hit split, and then you can kind of splice your tracks that way. So I'm going to drag this over to the one. Let's start with this Kalani song first. So you could also drag any sort of DJ drop in you want at the start of a mix, anything like that. You can add reverb, delay to it, whatever you want. But just for the example of this, let's say I'm doing some sort of tempo change and to kind of start things off. Let's say I'm going to start like really slow and build into it. Everything in Ableton you can automate, which I've talked about in previous videos. Well, almost anything. So if you right click on the tempo, you can hit show automation, and then in your actual master track down here, it will show you the tempo and you can automate it. So obviously I want it to get to 100, but I could like start super slow with it and then kind of build up to it. So I could do my intro, like maybe I have some voiceover of me talking about things, upcoming gigs, DJ drops, whatever, special effects. You could even do a low pass here too if you're really trying to filter it in. So I'll even automate that as well in terms of like the start of a mix. So I'll just drop an auto filter in there. And this basically just acts just like a filter that you would have on your mixer. And then I'll even set some different points and really kind of drop it in. And another thing that's cool is you can adjust the actual curve of the automation itself. So I believe it's Alt on PC. If you hold Alt, you get this little circle icon right here on your mouse. And then you can actually drag and adjust the curve of the effect. So if I want it to be a little bit different of a curve of me kind of using the filter, that's how I would adjust it. So let's hear what that sounds like. And since you're doing that kind of like low pass, that does give you the option to like have some higher range frequencies come through. So like if you're talking or you have those DJ drops, this would be a good time to use them. Another thing too, make sure you turn off your effects when you're not using them, because you don't want randomly to have all of your low ends or some of your highs get shaved off because you didn't turn your effect off. When you're done using your effect, make sure you have that activation button, just show automation, and you can turn it on and off. So whenever you're done with something in a mix, make sure you're turning that effect off. So obviously I want it to get to 107 because that's the tempo of the Jack Harlow track. So I'm going to set that first. So the end of the transition, I want it to be at 107. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have an EQ8 on both channels. I prefer the EQ8. You can use the EQ3, but I like the EQ8 because you can get a little more precise with it, in my opinion. So what I'm looking to do, I'm going to have this be pretty simple. You can make it intricate if you want. You can do a bunch of different EQ sweeps, stuff like that. But I'm just going to be swapping out the low end, and I'm just going to be changing out the basses, because a good rule of thumb is you never want conflicting bass lines. It can really muddy up whatever you're doing when you're DJing. It can sound kind of bad. So what I'm going to do is I am actually going to set this here, curve, and this is going to act as a high pass filter. And then what's going to happen is I am going to probably start to slowly roll off the low end here until I get to about 125 hertz. And I'll do the inverse with the Jack Harlow track. So I'll actually start the effect pretty intense at 125. And then the effect will eventually turn off once I drop it all the way down. And then another thing that I like to add too is towards the end, let's say on this last like one note here, I like to add maybe a delay. I like to use a lot of delays when I'm DJing, or any sort of reverb. And then what I'll do is, so I'll just drop a delay effect on there. And let's maybe set it to 2 with fade. And then, like I said, you kind of want to turn it on, and then turn it off when you're done with it. But I want that delay to go a little bit longer, so I will set it to end later. Another thing to reference with the delay too is I'm just going to turn the filter off. The filter basically adjusts the frequency that's kind of like coming out of the delay. So if you really want to have only the highs come through on the delay, you can adjust the filter that way. If you want the lows to come through, or if you want it to be in the middle, you can do it that way. I might actually leave that on now that I heard it. Set that to 1000. And then if you ever get confused on the feedback and dry wet in terms of the delay itself, you should always know that your feedback is going to be how long the effect is going to go for, and your dry wet is going to be how loud the delay is going to be. So if you set it at 100, the second part that's going to come in on the delay is going to be much louder than the initial audio. So I never go above 50. I'm always dropping it. So I'll probably do it even like, I don't know, 30, 35. Maybe I'll just start 35. And then I'll raise my feedback to 60. Maybe I want it to be a little bit longer, so it'll sound like this. So it should sound like this now. Now you could also do the same thing with reverb too. I have a lot of reverb sends that I use. If you guys have seen any of my other videos, you know I like to do that a lot. But I'll just drop the reverb on there so you guys can get a good example here. So I'm going to take off any of the input processing. That's very similar to the EQ and the delay in the middle, like I was telling you guys. I am going to keep it the same and see what it does. And I'm just going to turn it on this last kick here. See how it sounds. Solo this track. Could be longer, and it could be a little bit more of a wet. So let's try that on this second half here, see what it sounds like. Now I might even turn the volume down a little bit too. I might even start to automate the volume a little bit, like if I was going down on the fader just slightly before I applied the effect. Maybe drop it down 2 dB. Even a little bit more, 2.5, 2.6-ish. And then I'll actually increase the decay time more. Pretty much only playing with the decay and dry wet. I might be playing with the stereo a little bit, depending on how wide I want the effect to be. But typically, just the decay time and the dry wet will do for a DJ mix. one of the last things I kind of want to go over is if you're getting lost with your mixes, I always try to keep one song to one audio track, okay? So this Kalani song, it's just going to be this song in there. The next track is going to be the next track. So my mixes, when they're done, look like this long, kind of like diagonal line coming down. Some people don't like to do it that way. Some people like to use the vertical mode of Ableton to do that. I prefer to do the horizontal way just because I've been DJing like that for a long time now. So I like to have it go down. So when your mix is done, it looks like this one kind of like diagonal stack coming downward. And what's nice in Ableton too is you can apply any other effects that you have, any packs. So let's see here. Say I just want to add like an up down, like kind of riser thing. And that's kind of the general rule of thumb, to be honest. These, like, it's not this crazy sort of rocket science thing. I mean, if you're just starting out on Ableton, the automation stuff can be a little bit weird because, you know, if you're looking at multiple lanes and you're putting them in different things, it can start to look a little bit confusing. But in terms of the actual like automations, that's a majority of what I'm doing when I'm putting together a mix. Unless I have to go back on my mixer and record scratches for something that I want to do, I'm not even that big of a scratcher to begin with, so it doesn't really apply to me. So a lot of the time I'm just using an EQ8, maybe some reverb, some delay, and I might be adding some effects on there and maybe some impacts and risers depending on what I see with the transition. To be honest, this is kind of the standard across the board. Doesn't matter what DAW you're using. There's no sort of like magical, like, this is how I have the secret sauce to make the best mix in whatever DAW. Like, it's not, it's just some simple automation, just like you kind of would when you're DJing. If you just treat it like that, you'll have a good mix come out. And if you run into any issues with things clipping or things like that, you can just drop the volume of all the tracks. Some people start their mixes with everything dropped down like -3 dB just to leave themselves a little bit of headroom so that the end of the mix they can adjust the limiter a little bit and they can crank it up just a little bit, just so their mix isn't clipping or they're not having any sort of distortion or anything like that when they're putting the mix together. But that does it for today's video. Hopefully you guys learned something new. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And we appreciate you over here. Have a good weekend full of successful gigs. And I'll be back soon.